The dark blue sky was sprinkled with stars as J.D. Vance stepped out of his car in front of Le Ciel restaurant. The soft glow from inside the restaurant spilled onto the sidewalk. After a week filled with endless meetings, heated debates, and very little sleep, Vance had been looking forward to this dinner for days. Le Ciel wasn't just any restaurant, it was where presidents and world leaders often came to enjoy a quiet meal away from the public eye. Reservations at 8 o'clock, Vance said to Mike, his head of security. Mike nodded and walked slightly ahead as they approached the gleaming glass doors. The restaurant looked exactly as Vance had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, white tablecloths draped over perfectly arranged tables, and the soft melody of a piano filled the air. The smell of fresh bread and expensive wine greeted them as they entered. A thin man with slicked back hair and a perfectly pressed suit stood behind a small podium. His smile was practiced and polite as they approached, but something changed in his eyes when he saw Vance. The smile remained frozen on his face, but it no longer reached his eyes. "Good evening, gentlemen," the man said, his voice smooth as silk. "How may I help you?" "Reservation for Vance, table for 4, J.D. said, loosening his tie slightly. The weight of the day was heavy on his shoulders, and he was looking forward to good food and better conversation. The man, the maitre d', glanced down at his tablet, scrolling with his finger. He frowned slightly, then looked up again. "I'm terribly sorry, sir, but I don't see your reservation." Vance raised an eyebrow. "That's strange. My assistant confirmed it just yesterday." "One moment, please." The maitre d' walked away, disappearing behind a door marked private. Mike shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Something's off," he whispered to Vance. Vance had been in politics long enough to recognize when something wasn't right. He'd faced plenty of cold shoulders and closed doors since entering public life. Standing in the entryway, he watched as diners enjoyed their meals, utterly unaware of the small drama unfolding near the entrance. 5 minutes passed before the maitre d' returned, now accompanied by a shorter, older man with salt and pepper hair and a permanent frown etched into his face. "Mr. Vance," the older man said, not extending his hand. "I'm Robert Thompson, the manager of Le Ciel. I'm afraid there's been a mistake with your reservation." "A mistake?" Vance repeated. "Yes, it appears we've been overbooked tonight." Thompson's eyes darted around, looking everywhere but directly at Vance. "We simply don't have space to accommodate your party. I do apologize for the inconvenience." As if on cue, the front door opened and a couple walked in. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Chen," the maitre d' said, his smile genuine this time. "Your table is ready. Right this way, please." Vance watched as the couple was led to an empty table, one of several visible from where he stood. "Overbooked, you said?" Vance asked quietly. Thompson cleared his throat. "Perhaps I misspoke. That particular table was reserved weeks in advance." One of Vance's security team members leaned in close. "Sir, there are at least 3 empty tables I can see from here." Vance had never been one to make a scene. Growing up in Middletown, Ohio, his grandmother had taught him to hold his head high when faced with unfairness. "I understand," he said simply. As they turned to leave, Vance noticed a young woman watching from near the kitchen entrance. Her dark eyes were wide, and she looked deeply uncomfortable with what she was witnessing. Outside, the night air felt cooler than before. Vance's dinner plans were ruined, but he wasn't entirely surprised. Since taking office, he'd experienced this kind of treatment more than once. "Where to now, sir?" Mike asked, already on his phone looking for alternatives. Before Vance could answer, the restaurant door opened again. The young woman he'd noticed earlier rushed out, looking over her shoulder nervously. "Sir," she called, hurrying toward them. "Sir, I need to tell you something." Vance turned, curiosity replacing his disappointment. "My name's Anna," she said, slightly out of breath. "I work inside." "I just wanted you to know there was no mistake with your reservation. I saw it in the system myself this morning." "Then why?" Vance began. "The owner saw you arrive and told Mr. Thompson not to serve you," she said, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "He said he doesn't serve politicians with your views. I could get fired for telling you this, but it didn't seem right to me. Everyone should be treated the same, no matter what they believe." Vance looked back at the glowing windows of Le Ciel, understanding dawning on his face. This wasn't about overbooking. This was about politics. Anna stood there in her black and white server uniform, her hands shaking slightly. The restaurant's exterior lights cast long shadows across the parking lot as she glanced nervously over her shoulder. "I could lose my job for this," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "But I just couldn't watch it happen. It's not right." Vance studied her face. In his years of politics, he'd learned to spot sincerity, and this young woman had it in spades. "I appreciate your honesty, Anna. Truly." "The owner, Mr. Beaumont, he saw you on the security camera when you pulled up," Anna continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. "He stormed into the kitchen and told everyone that under no circumstances were you to be served. He said, and I'm quoting here, 'I don't care if we have to lie, but that man is not eating in my restaurant tonight.'" Mike, the security head, stepped forward. "Did he say why?" Anna nodded. "He mentioned something about your speech last month, the one about urban renewal projects. He said your policies would destroy neighborhoods like the one he grew up in." Vance sighed. He remembered that speech. It had been twisted and taken out of context by several media outlets. What he proposed was actually meant to help struggling neighborhoods, not harm them. "It happens," Vance said quietly, "more often than you'd think." "Well, it shouldn't," Anna replied, a flash of anger in her eyes. "My parents always taught me to listen to people, even if I disagree with them. Mr. Beaumont didn't even give you a chance." A cold breeze swept through the parking lot, making Anna shiver in her thin uniform. The sounds of dishes clinking and soft laughter drifted out each time the restaurant door opened. "You should get back inside before they notice you're gone," Vance said. "I wouldn't want you to get in trouble on my account." Anna shook her head. "I'm not sure I want to work for someone who judges people without knowing them." She squared her shoulders. "Besides, I've been saving up for nursing school. Maybe this is a sign it's time to make that change." "You're a nurse?" Vance asked, a sudden idea forming in his mind. "Not yet, but it's what I've wanted to be since I was 10. My little brother had leukemia, and the nurses who took care of him, they were like angels. I want to be that for someone else." Vance reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Here's my direct number. Would you be willing to tell me more about what happened tonight? Maybe over coffee someday next week." Anna looked surprised but took the card. "You're not going to storm in there and make a scene, or call the newspapers? That's what most big shots would do." Vance smiled. "I'm not most big shots, Anna, and making a scene rarely solves anything." As Anna tucked the card into her pocket, the restaurant door swung open again. A tall man with a thick mustache peered out, his eyes narrowing when he spotted Anna. "Cortez, what are you doing out here? We've got tables waiting." Anna's face paled. "Coming, Mr. Peters." She turned back to Vance. "That's the floor manager. I have to go." "Thank you again for your honesty," Vance said. "It takes courage to stand up for what's right." Anna nodded quickly before hurrying back toward the restaurant. At the door, she paused and looked back. "For what it's worth, sir, my family came from nothing. We lived in a trailer park until I was 12. People like you, who made it out of tough places, you give people like me hope." And with that, she disappeared inside. Mike cleared his throat. "What now, sir? Should I call Doug at the post? He'd run with this story in a heartbeat." Vance watched the door where Anna had vanished, thinking of her dream to become a nurse, of the owner who judged him without knowing him, of the way politics had become so divisive that people couldn't even break bread together anymore. "No," he said finally. "No reporters. No social media posts. No outrage." His security team exchanged confused glances. "Sir," one of them asked, "they just discriminated against you. That's a story people should hear." Vance turned away from the restaurant, his mind already working on something bigger than revenge or public shaming. "Get me everything you can find on Antoine Beaumont," he said as they walked back to the car. "His background, his charity work, his political donations. Everything." "You planning to expose him?" Mike asked, already pulling out his phone. Vance shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "Just the opposite, Mike. I think Mr. Beaumont and I are about to become unlikely partners." As they drove away from Le Ciel, the glittering restaurant growing smaller in the rearview mirror, Vance's grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "The true measure of a person isn't how they treat folks who agree with them. It's how they respond to those who don't. The morning light streamed through the blinds in Vance's office as he reviewed the folder his team had put together on Antoine Beaumont. The smell of coffee filled the room, and the distant sound of phones ringing carried down the hallway. "He's quite the character," said Lisa, his chief of staff, leaning against the doorframe. "Self-made success story. Grew up in the south side of Chicago. Single mom who worked 3 jobs. Started as a dishwasher at 16 and worked his way up." Vance nodded, studying a photo of Beaumont. The chef had the same serious expression Vance had seen in countless interviews, intense eyes that seemed to be constantly evaluating everything around him. "Sounds familiar," Vance murmured, thinking of his own upbringing in Middletown. "There's more," Lisa continued, flipping through her notes. "He's donated to several progressive causes, started a cooking program for at-risk youth, won 3 James Beard Awards. And he's not shy about his politics. He's given interviews criticizing your stance on urban development." "But he's never met me," Vance said, closing the folder. The door opened wider, and Tom, Vance's communications director, burst in, waving his phone. "Sir, we've got at least 3 reporters asking for comments about last night. Someone tipped them off." "What are they saying?" Lisa asked, frowning. "That the senator was refused service at LaSalle because of his politics. Social media's already picking up the story. #VanceBanned is trending." Vance stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Washington skyline. The easy path would be to lean into the controversy, to play the victim, to rally his supporters against the elitist chef who refused to serve him. It would make for good headlines, maybe even boost his approval ratings. But that path led nowhere he wanted to go. "Tom, I want you to call those reporters back and tell them I have no comment at this time," Vance said. "No comment?" Tom looked shocked. "Sir, this is a gift. The other side is always calling us intolerant, but here they are, literally refusing to serve you food because they don't like your views. It's perfect." "Perfect for what?" Vance turned to face them. "For making people hate each other even more. For deepening the divide? No thanks." Lisa studied him carefully. "You have something else in mind." Vance nodded. "Get me a meeting with Beaumont. Today, if possible." Tom laughed nervously. "The guy who just kicked you out of his restaurant. Why would he agree to meet with you?" "Because I'm going to call him myself," Vance replied, picking up his phone. "And I'm going to make him an offer he'll find hard to refuse." 2 hours later, Vance sat alone at a corner table in a small coffee shop 10 blocks from LaSalle. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of college students with laptops and an elderly man reading a newspaper. Nobody gave him a second glance, which was exactly what he wanted. The bell over the door jingled, and Antoine Beaumont walked in. He was shorter in person than he appeared on television, but he carried himself with the same confidence Vance had seen in his cooking shows. He spotted Vance immediately and walked over, his expression guarded. "Senator," he said with a curt nod, not extending his hand. "Chef Beaumont, thank you for coming." Vance gestured to the chair across from him. "Coffee?" "I'll pass," Beaumont said, but he sat down anyway. "Your assistant was quite persistent, said it would be worth my time." "I hope it will be," Vance replied. "For both of us." Beaumont leaned back, crossing his arms. "Let me guess. You're here to threaten me with a lawsuit, or maybe you want to shame me publicly. Your followers have already been flooding my restaurant's social media with 1-star reviews." "I'm sorry to hear that," Vance said, and he meant it. "I had nothing to do with that. In fact, I explicitly told my team not to comment on what happened." Beaumont's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his defensive posture. "Then why am I here, Senator?" "Because I think we have more in common than you might believe," Vance said, taking a sip of his coffee. "We both grew up with very little. We both know what it's like to be hungry, to worry about keeping the lights on. And we both managed to build something from nothing." "Don't try to compare us," Beaumont said, but there was less edge to his voice now. "Your policies would gut neighborhoods like the one I grew up in." "That's not true," Vance replied calmly. "But I understand why you might think that, given how my positions have been portrayed by some media outlets." "I'm not here to debate policy, though." "Then what do you want?" Vance leaned forward. "I want to propose a partnership, a one-night event at LaSalle, a charity dinner to benefit the downtown food bank." Beaumont stared at him. You're joking. I'm not. You'd create the menu. I'd help with the guest list. We'd bring together people from all political backgrounds, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. No speeches, no fundraising for campaigns. Just good food and conversation, with all proceeds going to feed hungry families. And what do you get out of this? Vance smiled. The same thing you do. A chance to show people that we can still break bread together, even when we disagree. That politics doesn't have to poison everything. Beaumont uncrossed his arms, studying Vance with new interest. And if I say no? Then I thank you for your time and walk away. No hard feelings, no public statements, no revenge. Vance shrugged. Life's too short. The chef was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. Finally, he spoke. You're not what I expected, Senator. I get that a lot, Vance replied. I'll think about it, Beaumont said, standing up. That's all I can promise for now. Vance nodded, offering his hand. This time, Beaumont took it. That's all I'm asking for. And chef, regardless of what you decide, I'd still love to try your famous duck confit someday. A hint of a smile played at the corner of Beaumont's mouth. We'll see, Senator, we'll see. As Beaumont left the coffee shop, Vance's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. How did it go? He typed back a single word. Hope. 3 days passed with no word from Beaumont. Vance tried not to think about it too much. He had speeches to write, meetings to attend, and constituents who needed his help with everything from veteran benefits to immigration paperwork. On the 4th day, while Vance was reviewing a new infrastructure bill in his office, Lisa poked her head in. Call on line 2, she said with a strange half-smile. It's Chef Beaumont. Vance nodded, took a deep breath, and picked up the phone. This is Vance. Senator. Beaumont's voice was as crisp and precise as his knife work. I've been thinking about your proposal. And? I'd like to discuss the details, in person, at La Ciel. Vance's eyebrows shot up. You're inviting me to your restaurant. A short laugh came through the phone. Don't sound so surprised. I'm a businessman. And I've had some interesting conversations since we met. What kind of conversations? Let's just say your young server Anna is quite persuasive, and apparently she's not the only one on my staff who thinks I made a mistake. He paused. So, dinner tonight? 7 o'clock? We'll be closed to the public, just you and me. I'll be there, Vance said, trying to keep the surprise out of his voice. The line went quiet for a moment before Beaumont added, and Senator? No security detail inside. Just you. Later that evening, Vance found himself once again standing outside La Ciel. This time, instead of the usual bustle of patrons and staff, the restaurant was eerily quiet. The lights were dimmed, and a small, closed for private event sign hung on the door. I don't like this, said Mike, scanning the darkened windows. How do we know it's not a setup? Because Beaumont's not that kind of man, Vance replied. He's stubborn and opinionated, but he's not dishonest. Still, we'll be right outside if you need us. Vance nodded and approached the door. Before he could knock, it swung open. Anna stood there, smiling warmly. Senator Vance, welcome to La Ciel. She stepped aside to let him in. Chef is waiting for you. The restaurant looked completely different in the softer lighting. Without the crowd, it seemed smaller, more intimate. The only table with settings was in the back corner, partially hidden behind a decorative screen. As Vance followed Anna, he noticed some of the staff watching him from the kitchen door. They quickly disappeared when they realized he'd spotted them. Beaumont rose as Vance approached the table. He was wearing his chef's whites, but he'd removed the tall hat. Senator, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Please. A bottle of red wine was already breathing on the table. Beaumont poured 2 glasses as Vance sat down. I owe you an apology, Beaumont said without preamble, sliding a glass toward Vance. What I did was unprofessional and childish. Vance took the wine but didn't drink. What changed your mind? Beaumont gestured toward the kitchen. My staff for one. After you left that night, Anna told everyone what happened. Some agreed with me, but most didn't. They said I was becoming the very thing I claimed to hate, someone who judges without listening. He took a sip of his wine before continuing. And then there was your reaction. No angry tweets, no interviews calling me out. just silence. It was unexpected. "I had a better idea," Vance said simply. "So you said." Beaumont leaned back in his chair. "A charity dinner. People from both sides of the aisle breaking bread together. It's a nice idea, Senator. But do you really think one dinner can make a difference?" "One dinner?" "No," Vance admitted. "But it's a start. We have to begin somewhere." Anna approached with 2 small plates. "Chef's special amuse-bouche," she announced. "Duck liver mousse with black cherry compote." As she set the plates down, Vance noticed a textbook peeking out of her apron pocket. "Nursing school?" he asked. She blushed. "Just some reading for my entrance exam. I applied last week." "Good for you," Vance said sincerely. After Anna left, Beaumont watched Vance thoughtfully. "You remember her career goals?" "I try to remember what matters to people." Vance tasted the mousse and couldn't help but smile. "This is incredible." "Of course it is," Beaumont said with a hint of pride. "Now about this dinner. If, and I stress if, I were to agree, we'd need some ground rules." For the next hour, as course after exquisite course arrived at their table, they hashed out the details. The guest list would include equal numbers of conservative and progressive voices. No cameras inside. All proceeds would go to the downtown food bank. Beaumont would create a menu that told a story of American diversity, dishes inspired by various regional and immigrant traditions. And the name? Beaumont asked as they finished their dessert, a delicate apple tart that practically melted on the tongue. Every event needs a name. Vance thought for a moment. What about breaking bread, building bridges? Beaumont tested the words, mouthing them silently. "Not bad, Senator. Not bad at all." "So we have a deal." Vance extended his hand across the table. The chef hesitated, studying Vance's face as if looking for some hidden agenda. Finally, he nodded and shook Vance's hand firmly. "We have a deal. 2 weeks from Saturday." As they stood to leave, Beaumont cleared his throat awkwardly. "One more thing, Senator. I had my assistant look up that speech, the one about urban renewal that made me so angry. I actually read the whole thing this time, not just the quotes I saw online. And I still don't agree with all of it," Beaumont said with a small smile. "But it wasn't the heartless attack on poor neighborhoods that I thought it was. It was more nuanced." "Most things are, when you look at them closely," Vance replied. As Vance walked toward the exit, he spotted Anna by the door, waiting to let him out. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For having the courage to tell the truth, even when it was risky." He glanced back toward Beaumont, who was speaking with the kitchen staff. "Sometimes people just need a little push to see beyond their preconceptions." Anna smiled. "That's what my mom always says. People aren't their politics." "Your mom sounds wise," Vance said as he stepped outside into the cool night air. "I think we could all use that reminder these days." Word spread quickly about the upcoming dinner at La Ciel. What had started as a private agreement between a senator and a chef soon became the talk of Washington. Phone calls flooded both Vance's office and the restaurant. Some were supportive, others less so. "You're legitimizing his dangerous ideas," a prominent liberal commentator told Beaumont over the phone. "You're breaking bread with the enemy," a conservative radio host warned Vance. But for every critic, there seemed to be someone who understood what they were trying to accomplish. A week before the event, Vance sat in his office with his team, reviewing the final guest list. 20 people from across the political spectrum had confirmed their attendance. Some were politicians, others were activists, journalists, and community leaders. "The Washington Post wants to do a feature," Lisa said, glancing up from her tablet. "They're calling it the dinner party that could heal America." Tom snorted. "That's a bit dramatic." "Maybe," Vance agreed. "But I'll take optimism over cynicism any day." His phone buzzed. A text from Beaumont, "Need to talk. Coming to your office now." 15 minutes later, the chef was pacing in front of Vance's desk, his face tight with worry. "We have a problem," Beaumont said. "Someone leaked the menu to a food blogger who's now claiming the whole dinner is a publicity stunt to salvage my reputation. They're saying I'm selling out." "Does it matter what they say?" Vance asked. "It shouldn't, but," Beaumont ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. 3 guests just cancelled. Said they don't want to be part of a media circus." Vance leaned back in his chair. So we find 3 more. Just like that? Beaumont looked skeptical. Just like that. Vance pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Hey, it's Vance. Remember that dinner I mentioned? We just had some spots open up. Interested? He listened for a moment, then smiled. Great. Bring your wife. It's at Les Ciels, 2 Saturdays from now. He hung up and looked at Beaumont. That's 2 spots filled. Who was that? Beaumont asked. My old history professor from Yale. Lifelong Democrat. Brilliant mind. Terrible fashion sense. Vance dialed another number. And now for someone from the other side of the spectrum. By the time Beaumont left Vance's office an hour later, they had not only replaced the 3 guests who'd backed out, but added 2 more seats to accommodate additional interest. This might actually work, Beaumont admitted as he shook Vance's hand at the door. It already is working, Vance replied. People are talking. That's step 1. The night of the dinner arrived with an unexpected complication. Protesters. A small but vocal group had gathered across the street from Les Ciels, holding signs with slogans like "No unity with hate" and "Principles over pasta." Vance's car pulled up to the back entrance, avoiding the commotion out front. Mike looked tense as he surveyed the alley. Maybe we should reschedule, he suggested, not for the first time. Not a chance, Vance said firmly, straightening his tie as he got out of the car. This is too important. Inside, the restaurant had been transformed. The tables had been arranged in a large U-shape, allowing everyone to see each other. Small place cards marked each seat, carefully positioning people so that no one sat next to someone who shared their exact political views. Beaumont greeted Vance at the kitchen door, dressed in his finest chef's whites. Some of your guests had to walk through the protest line, he said, sounding worried. They're a bit riled up. Then it's our job to calm them down, Vance replied. How's Anna doing? Beaumont's expression softened. She's nervous but excited. I made her the official host for the evening. Figured she earned it. Anna appeared then, wearing a simple black dress instead of her server's uniform, clipboard in hand. Senator Vance, everyone's almost here. We're just waiting on 2 more guests. Vance peeked into the dining room. The space hummed with awkward conversation as people who normally only saw each other on opposing news segments tried to make small talk. A conservative talk show host was cautiously discussing baseball with a liberal newspaper editor. A young climate activist was showing pictures of her dog to an older oil company executive. It's time, Vance said to Beaumont. Ready to make some history. The chef took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. They walked together into the dining room, and a hush fell over the gathered guests. All eyes turned to the unlikely pair, the conservative senator and the progressive chef, standing side by side. Ladies and gentlemen, Vance began, thank you for having the courage to be here tonight. I know some of you faced criticism for accepting this invitation. And some of you had to walk past protesters to get in the door, Beaumont added. We appreciate that more than you know. Vance looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. Tonight isn't about changing anyone's mind on policy or politics. It's about something more basic, more human. It's about remembering that behind every political position is a person, someone with hopes and fears, someone with a family they love, someone who wants the best for their country, even if they disagree on what that looks like. Tonight, Beaumont continued, we're going to eat together. The menu tells a story of America. Dishes from different regions, different traditions, different cultures. But together, they make one meal, one experience we can share. Anna appeared with a tray of champagne flutes. As the glasses were distributed, Vance raised his in a toast. To breaking bread and building bridges, he said. To remembering our shared humanity, Beaumont added. The guests looked at each other uncertainly, then, one by one, they raised their glasses. For a moment, in that room, the divisions that seemed so insurmountable outside those walls felt just a little smaller. And as the first course began to arrive, Beaumont's famous New England clown chowder served alongside Southern cornbread, the conversations around the table slowly shifted from cautious small talk to genuine dialogue. The dinner at Les Ciels unfolded like a carefully orchestrated dance. After the first course broke the ice, the conversation around the table became livelier with each dish Beaumont sent out. By the time the third course arrived, a fusion of Tex-Mex and Cajun flavors that had even the most serious guests smiling with delight. Something remarkable was happening. A cable news host who had made his career attacking liberal policies was deep in conversation with an environmental activist about his grandchildren. "My youngest is obsessed with sea turtles," he said, showing pictures on his phone. "She'd love the work you're doing." At the other end of the table, a gun rights advocate and a Mothers Against Gun Violence organizer discovered they both had sons serving in the military. Their shared pride and worry created a bond that transcended their policy differences. Vance moved around the table between courses, making sure to speak with every guest. He noticed Anna watching the proceedings with wide eyes as she coordinated with the serving staff. "How's it going?" he asked her quietly. "It's amazing," she whispered. "These people shout at each other on TV, but look at them now." Beaumont emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. There was a light sheen of sweat on his forehead, but his eyes were bright with satisfaction. "Fourth course is coming," he announced. "Southern fried chicken with a northern maple glaze, served with collard greens and johnny cakes." A little bit of unity on a plate. As the plates were set down, Vance tapped his glass gently. The room quieted. "I'd like to share something with you all," he said. 2 weeks ago, I was turned away from this very restaurant because of my political beliefs." A murmur ran through the guests. Some looked surprised, others uncomfortable. "It would have been easy to get angry," Vance continued, "to call for boycotts or post outraged messages online. Plenty of people wanted me to do exactly that." He glanced at Beaumont, who nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. "But I realized something that night. The same thing that had led Chef Beaumont to turn me away was the same thing dividing our whole country. This idea that people we disagree with are enemies, that they're somehow less deserving of basic decency and respect." Beaumont stepped forward. "I made a mistake that night," he said simply. "I judged Senator Vance based on headlines and sound bites, not as a person. It wasn't my finest moment. But look what came from it," Vance said, gesturing to the table. "This dinner, this conversation, this chance to see each other as people first, not just positions on a political spectrum." The room was silent now, every eye fixed on the unlikely pair. "I'm not asking anyone to change their deeply held beliefs," Vance continued. "I'm just suggesting that maybe, just maybe, we can disagree without despising each other." An older woman with silver-streaked hair, the head of a progressive think tank, spoke up. "It's hard though, isn't it? When you believe someone's views are hurting real people." "It is hard," Vance agreed. "Probably the hardest thing we can do. But what's the alternative? More anger? More division? How's that working out for us so far?" A young man in a crisp suit, a conservative radio commentator, cleared his throat. "My grandfather used to say, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar." I never really got what he meant until tonight. Beaumont laughed softly. "As a chef, I can confirm that's true." The tension broke and laughter rippled around the table. As the dinner continued, Anna slipped out to the kitchen and returned with a pad of paper. She moved quietly around the table, asking guests to jot down one thing they'd learned or one perspective they'd gained during the evening. When the dessert, an apple pie with ingredients sourced from every region of the country, was served, Anna handed the collected notes to Vance. He read a few aloud. "I learned my opponent volunteers at the same hospital where my sister works. I discovered we both lost family in the opioid crisis. Different politics, same pain. I realized I've been so busy being right that I forgot how to listen." Outside, the protesters had dwindled to just a handful, that energy sapped by the cold night air and the lack of confrontation they'd hoped for. Inside, something small but significant was shifting in the room. No one was changing their core beliefs. The liberal guests would still be liberal when they left. The conservatives would still be conservative. But the sharp edges of judgment had softened just a bit. Faces had replaced caricatures. Stories had replaced assumptions. As coffee was served, conversations broke into smaller groups. A tech executive and a labor organizer exchanged contact information, planning to continue their discussion about worker retraining programs. 2 senators from opposing parties discovered they'd both had legislation stuck in the same committee and began strategizing ways to move it forward. Vance found himself standing near the kitchen doors with Beaumont, watching the scene unfold. Think we changed the world tonight? Beaumont asked with a small smile. Probably not, Vance replied honestly. But we changed this room, and maybe that's enough for now. Anna approached, her clipboard still in hand. Chef, Senator, the Washington Post reporter is outside. She's asking if either of you would like to comment on the dinner. Vance and Beaumont looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Tell her we'll both speak with her, Vance said. Together, 3 months after the dinner at La Cille, Vance stood in the back of a large community center, watching as volunteers packed boxes of food. The Breaking Bread dinner had raised over $200,000 for the downtown food bank, enough to provide meals for thousands of local families. But the impact hadn't stopped there. The Washington Post article about the dinner had gone viral, sparking conversations across the country about the possibility of civil dialogue in an age of division. Other restaurants had begun hosting their own versions of the event. A popular talk show even devoted an entire episode to bringing together people from opposite sides of the political spectrum to share a meal and conversation. Vance spotted Anna across the room, directing a group of volunteers. She wore scrubs now. She'd started nursing school the month after the dinner, with a little help from an anonymous scholarship that Beaumont had arranged. "Senator Vance," she called, waving him over. "I didn't know you were coming today." "Just wanted to see how everything was going," he said, looking around at the bustling activity. "Looks like you've got quite an operation here." Anna beamed. "We're packing twice as many boxes as we did last month. And guess who's coming later to help? Chef Beaumont. He's bringing some of his kitchen staff too." Vance nodded, not entirely surprised. The chef had become a regular volunteer since the dinner, often bringing along ingredients that would have otherwise gone to waste at his restaurant. "How are your classes going?" Vance asked. "Tough but good," Anna replied. "Anatomy is kicking my butt, but I'm getting through it." She lowered her voice. "I still don't know who funded that scholarship, but whoever it was, they changed my life." Before Vance could respond, a familiar voice called from across the room. "Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence." Beaumont strode toward them, followed by several people in chef's whites carrying boxes of fresh produce. His tone was gruff, but the smile on his face was genuine. "I hear you're voting against the agriculture bill next week," Beaumont said without preamble. Vance raised an eyebrow. "I am. Have you read the fine print? Section 47 would hurt small farmers more than help them." "Actually, I have read it. All 824 pages. Beaumont set down his box. "And I think you're wrong about Section 47. Anna glanced between them, looking worried, but Vance just laughed. "Tell you what," he said. "If you've got time after we finish here, let's grab coffee and you can tell me exactly why I'm wrong." "Deal," Beaumont said with a nod. And that was the real miracle that had grown from that night of rejection at La Cille, not that they suddenly agreed on everything, but that they could disagree without resentment. They had learned to see past politics to the person beyond. Later that afternoon, as the volunteer shift ended, Vance found himself helping Anna load the last few boxes into a delivery van. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "my mom called me yesterday all excited. She said she saw a story on the news about a dinner just like ours happening in her town. People from different churches, different neighborhoods, different political parties, all sitting down together." "Is that right?" Vance closed the van doors. "Yeah," she said, "they're calling it Breaking Bread too. It's spreading, Senator, like ripples in a pond." As they walked back inside, Vance's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Don't forget, 60 Minutes interview tomorrow about the dinner initiative." The media attention had been unexpected. What started as one night of civil conversation had somehow captured the national imagination. People were hungry for examples of bridge building in a time of walls. In the community center kitchen, Beaumont was showing a group of kids how to properly chop vegetables. His hands moved with practiced precision as the children watched in awe. The trick, he was saying, is to respect the ingredient. Understand what makes it unique before you try to change it. Vance leaned against the doorway, struck by the metaphor. Wasn't that the whole point of what they'd been trying to do? To understand each other before judging, to respect differences before demanding change. A local news crew was setting up in the main room for a segment on the food bank. The reporter spotted Vance and waved him over. "Senator, Can we get a quick statement about how all this started? Vance looked around for Beaumont and caught his eye across the room. With a subtle nod, the chef excused himself from the children and joined Vance. Actually, Vance said to the reporter, it's a story best told by both of us. As they stood side by side, ready to share their unlikely journey from confrontation to collaboration, Vance thought about how easily things could have gone differently that night at La Ciel. If he'd responded to rejection with righteous anger, if Beaumont had doubled down on his initial judgment, if Anna hadn't had the courage to speak up. Sometimes the most important choices weren't the big dramatic ones that made headlines. Sometimes they were the quiet decisions to choose grace over grievance, curiosity over certainty, connection over conflict. The reporter's cameraman counted down 3, 2, 1. So, Senator Vance, Chef Beaumont, tell us how a denied dinner reservation led to this nationwide movement. Vance smiled. Well, it's a story that begins with a misunderstanding and continues with a conversation, Beaumont added. The rest, Vance finished, is still being written, not just by us, but by everyone who's decided that maybe, just maybe, we're better off breaking bread than breaking ties.